Well, as we get closer to the Easter season, we're going to spend 3 or 4 weeks talking about Jesus and his life and all of that kind of stuff. And so today, we're talking about the crucifixion. So we're going to be in a couple of places. Acts 13, 26 through 29 says, "Brothers and sisters, children of Abraham's race, and those among you who fear God, it is to us that this word of salvation has been sent. Since the residents of Jerusalem and their rulers did not recognize him or the sayings of the prophets that are read every Sabbath, they have fulfilled their words by condemning him. Though they found no grounds for the death sentence, they asked Pilate to have him killed. When they had carried out all that had been written about him, they took him down from a tree and put him in a tomb." And it goes on to talk about the resurrection, but that's what we're going to talk about next week. Hebrews 10, 1 through 10 says this: "Since the law has only a shadow of the good things to come and not the reality itself of those things, it can never perfect the worshipers by the same sacrifices they continually offer year after year. Otherwise, wouldn't they have stopped being offered, since the worshipers purified once and for all would no longer have any consciousness of sins? But in the sacrifices there is a reminder of sins year after year, for it is impossible for the blood of bulls and goats to take away sins. Therefore, as he was coming into the world, he said, 'You did not desire sacrifice and offering, but you prepared a body for me. You did not delight in whole burnt offerings and sin offerings. Then I said, See, it is written about me in the scroll. I have come to do your will, O God.' After he says above, 'You did not desire delight in sacrifices and offerings, whole burnt offerings and sin offerings, which are offered according to the law,' he then says, 'See, I have come to do your will.' He takes away the first to establish the second. By this will we have been sanctified through the offering of the body of Jesus Christ once for all time." I titled this message this week, "This is Love." What Jesus does through the cross is the greatest love story ever told. One man paid the price for all of us for all time. So let's kind of talk through some of this. At the cross, humanity's worst was displayed. I want to read a medical doctor's explanation of what crucifixion is. What is crucifixion? The cross is placed on the ground, and an exhausted man is quickly thrown backwards with his shoulders against the wood. The legionnaire feels for the depression at the front of the wrist. He drives a heavy, square, wrought iron nail through the wrist and deep into the wood. Quickly, he moves to the other side and repeats the action, being careful not to pull the arms too tightly, but to allow some flex and movement. The cross is then lifted into place. The left foot is pressed backward against the right, and with both feet extended, toes down, a nail is driven through the arch of each, leaving the knees flexed. The victim is now crucified. As he slowly sags with more weight on the nails in the wrist, excruciating fiery pain shoots along the fingers and up the arms to explode in the brain. The nails in the wrists are putting pressure on the median nerves. As he pushes himself upward to avoid the stretching torment, he places the full weight on the nail through his feet. Again, he feels the searing agony of the nail tearing through the nerves between the bones of his feet. As the arms fatigue, cramps sweep through the muscles, knotting them in deep, relentless, throbbing pain. With these cramps comes the inability to push himself upward to breathe. Air can be drawn into the lungs, but not exhaled. He fights to raise himself in order to get even one small breath. Finally, carbon dioxide builds up in the lungs and in the bloodstream, and the cramps partially subside. Spasmodically, he's able to push himself upward to exhale and bring in life-giving oxygen. Hours of this limitless pain, cycles of twisting, joint-rending cramps, intermittent partial asphyxiation, searing pain as tissue is torn from his lacerated back as he moves up and down against the rough timber. Then another agony begins, a deep, crushing pain deep in the chest as the pericardium slowly fills with serum and begins to compress the heart. It is now almost over. The loss of tissue fluids has reached a critical level. The compressed heart is struggling to pump heavy, thick, sluggish blood into the tissues. The tortured lungs are making a frantic effort to gasp in small gulps of air. He can feel the chill of death creeping through his tissues. Finally, he can allow his body to die. All this the Bible records with the simple words, "And they crucified him," in Mark 15:24. What wondrous love is this? Man, this is love. At the cross, humanity's worst was displayed. Jesus was falsely accused. They had to make stuff up about him. They wanted to get him, and they had to make stuff up. They felt threatened, so they trumped up charges against him, and all of it was false. All of it was deceitful. All the people they recruited were telling lies. It's all based on false accusations. Think about that. Think about how you would feel if you were being falsely accused of a crime of some type. It was all false accusation. It was all based on deceit. It was all lies. Second thing, he was abandoned and betrayed. His 12 closest friends were the disciples. He spent time with a lot of different people, but the 12 people he spent the most time with, the disciples, every one of them left him. Every one of them abandoned him in his deepest time of need. And then one of them, Judas, betrayed him, stabbed him in the back, sold him out for money to the religious leaders. Every one of them, every one of his close friends abandoned him, betrayed him, denied him, whatever. That's the next thing. He was insulted, mocked, and denied. Peter, his best friend, denied even knowing him, cursed his name. Think about that. Your closest friend denies even knowing you. The crowds who days before had been praising him with hosannas and all that kind of stuff, treating him as if he was the king, they went from praise to mockery and verbal abuse and insults and just the most hideous, hateful thing. Like I picture, as a sports fan, I picture what you hear on the sports field or what you hear directed at umpires or whatever. I picture that type of thing and then some. The crowd is just yelling and cursing and insulting and mocking him. And finally, he was bruised and beaten. They hit him with what's called a cat of nine tails. It says the 40 lashes minus 139, whips across the back, bones through the flesh, ripping his flesh apart. They literally beat the daylights out of him, beat the crud out of him. They left him bloody, they left him bruised, they left him a spectacle. They left him robbed of dignity, humiliated, and ashamed. He was bruised and beaten for us. So at the cross, humanity's worst was displayed. But in the cross, God's best was demonstrated. The love of God was shown for us. How is it shown? Perfect Jesus is substituted for my imperfection. Excruciating pain, all of what he went through. In fact, the word excruciating was actually invented to describe what was happening through the crucifixion, apparently. It's derived from the same word anyway. It was this slow, painful death, asphyxiation, choking on your own vomit and blood. He went through that. He substituted his perfect life for me, for you, for us, to take our place, for our benefit, and he became our scapegoat. It's what we call the great exchange. His sinless life traded for our imperfect, sinful lives. His perfection substituted for our imperfection. Second thing, God's grace covered humanity's sin. Cross is horrible, and at the same time, it's wonderful. There's a Chris Tomlin song called The Wonderful Cross, and maybe no song better describes all of this. The man next to him, a robber, a thief, a man who'd probably known no good, heard Jesus say, "Today you'll be with me in paradise," because he made a deathbed confession, if you will. He didn't deserve it. God can use horrible endings, whether it's for that man, whether it's for what Jesus went through, to bring beautiful new beginnings. And grace covers our sin. It covers over our imperfections through the death, the sacrifice of Jesus. And finally, Jesus' death righted our wrongs. Love overcomes hate. Truth overcomes lies. Grace overcomes sin. Life comes from death. Nobody deserved what Jesus did, but he did it. And he exposed the lies of the devil with his truth. And we're no longer condemned in our sin. We're no longer slaves to sin. We are set free. We are redeemed. One man covered the sins of the many. From Jesus' death, from the death of Jesus, comes life. And we're made new. We're made alive because of Jesus. So a perfect Jesus is substitute for our imperfection. God's grace covers humanity's sin. Jesus' death rights our wrongs. And finally, through the cross, a couple of things we want to talk about here. Through the cross, God restores. When you look up the word restore, other parts of the definition or other words used for it, to bring back, to reinstate, to reinstall, to reestablish, to repair, to redevelop, to renovate, to rehabilitate, to reconstruct, to remodel, to return to its former state, to overhaul, to mend, to fix. Man, that's so beautiful to describe what we need in our lives and to describe what Jesus does for us. God restores. Second thing, everyone is offered full pardon and forgiveness. Every one of us needs to be made right with God, and we can experience that full forgiveness with God. We can be cleaned up. We can be cleansed. We can be made right. We can be washed whiter than snow according to the Bible. Through Jesus, through the cross. 1 John 1:9 says, if we confess our sins, he's faithful and just to forgive us our sins, to cleanse us from all unrighteousness. Psalm 51 talks about having our hearts cleaned up, our lives cleansed, being made washed whiter than snow. And finally, we're offered life and hope. In our sinful state, we're hopeless. But now we can be wonderful. We can be new. We can be beautiful. Again, we can have hope. Our failures don't have to be fatal. Our failures don't have to be final. It doesn't have to be the end. Death isn't the end. This life is not all that there is. A better life awaits with hope. An 1892 Supreme Court decision declared Jesus the Redeemer of mankind. Think about that. We're talking about 130 years ago, something like that. Today we live in a world that seems so lost. It seems so hopeless. I mean, the stuff that's going on in Ukraine and other things. Jobs are lost, marriages crumble, grades fall, vehicles fall apart, poverty, injustice, slavery, sex trafficking, dirty water, all that kind of stuff. We're born optimistic, and then life starts hitting, things start happening. We lose hope, and our optimism fails, and it starts falling apart, it starts fading. We become cynical, and we think things can never change. Circumstances have us stuck in a neutral state. But as long as we live, we have a chance for hope. We have a chance to live. We have a chance to have hope. We have a chance to start over. We have a chance to release the burden, to have a blank page, to have a new heart, a new change, a new chance. Turn it over to the one who went to the cross for you, the one who came to give us hope, the one who came to help us start anew. The cross shows the depths of God's love, shows the depths of God's forgiveness. God redeems us through through our debt cancellation, through the ransom payment, through the exchange payment of Jesus' life for ours. It shows God's love, his forgiveness, his cleansing, his restoration, his transformation. He takes away our sin. He becomes our substitute. He becomes our scapegoat. He died for us. What are we going to do about that? If we ignore it, we're a selfish and hardened people. If we accept it, then we have to truly accept it. Give ourselves completely to him, turn completely from sin, turn to God in a lifetime of growth, discipleship, following, committing to Jesus completely. So what about you? What will you do with the cross of Jesus? What will you do with what he's done for you? He died for me. I'll live for him.